Hello, horror stories. My name is Steven, and I want to share an experience I had while riding the subway. This paranormal story occurred when I went backpacking across the country. I'm from New Mexico and had barely left my city. My family was low income, so we couldn't afford this type of vacation. I was about 23 years old when I started the adventure, and more than 10 years have passed since then, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I began my trip by hitchhiking and arrived at a hotel on the route, where I spent the first nights. There I met two guys who came from Mexico. They were very friendly, and we became friends instantly. One night, while we were having drinks, they told me about their long trip and the very strange experiences they had had on the subway in Chicago, one of the cities I was heading to. I was warned about these events, especially since I was alone. They told me that one night, coming back from a bar, they took the subway to return to their hotel, which was about 30 minutes away. They say that the station was completely empty, and that they were the last cars to leave before they closed the station. They knew this because it was announced over the loudspeaker. They were standing near the tracks waiting for the subway. There was no one else except an older man sitting on a bench. Suddenly, in the opposite direction of the tracks, they saw a woman who appeared out of nowhere and threw herself onto the tracks. They were shocked, but when they turned to desperately look for her, there was no sign of her. It was as if he had vanished in the blink of an eye. The atmosphere became tense. Suddenly, the man who was sitting on the bench told them, "You should not fear what you have just seen. They feed on your fear." The atmosphere had become even more disturbing. The man on the bench stood up and walked towards them calmly, and with a serious look, he warned them, "Don't look at them, they are lost souls, trapped between this world and the next. They appear here because it is where they took their own lives, where desperation and sadness led them to make that drastic decision. If they feel afraid, they say they will become more powerful. It is their way of feeling alive again." They were left speechless, unable to believe what that man was telling them. However, what they had seen had been so real that they were trying to process it, exchanging looks of concern and terror. They felt deep fear, and the atmosphere had become very tense. They remembered that the station lights began to flash while the man told them about his experience. They had never experienced something so paranormal before. The truth is that I was quite skeptical when they told me about it. I thought maybe they were joking to scare me. How could I believe something like that? Everything seemed so unreal. However, their expressions and the terror in their eyes made me wonder. I felt really confused. The next morning, I said goodbye to the boys at the hotel. I continued my trip and was still a few hours away from reaching California. I planned to make one or two more stops along the way, depending on my itinerary. They were returning to Mexico for the night, so I continued with my backpacking adventure. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Just a few days ago, I had arrived in California, one of the largest and most visited states in the United States. I woke up very early and decided to go out to explore and see every corner of that huge city. I visited the most notable tourist sites, tried the typical food of the region, visited shops, and walked for hours. But before I knew it, it was after 10 at night, and I was very far from my hotel. At that moment, I quickened my pace to get to the nearest subway station as soon as possible. However, upon arriving there and finding it so desolate, I remembered the story those boys had told me at the hotel a few days before. I found a strangely calm and desolate atmosphere. The lights flickered dimly and there were hardly any people around me. I started to feel very afraid, but I had no other option. I tried to stay calm as I walked down the hallway toward the subway car, but I felt a presence that seemed to follow my steps, and a gust of wind made me shiver. When I looked back, I didn't see anyone, which made me think that everything was a product of my imagination due to the fear I felt. I tried to breathe deeply and keep walking. However, after a few minutes, I felt breathing nearby, as if someone was panting right behind me. I turned around sharply and saw a man walking towards me a few meters away. His face was disfigured, with numerous scars. His clothes barely covered his body with dirty rags, and he walked with a limp. My heart began to pound and a feeling of panic took over me. My steps hurried, driven by the instinct to escape that almost invisible presence. When I got to my stop, I met more people, but it seemed like no one else saw him. No one turned to look at him. It was as if only I could experience his presence, and there were about 4 people waiting in the same line, but the feeling I was experiencing was inexplicable. I had never felt anything like this before. Despite the presence of other people, I felt completely alone, with a very strong vibration. Finally, the subway arrived. I was relieved to be able to get home and leave that nightmare behind, thinking it was over. However, it was not. Although the car was almost empty, I sat next to a woman to feel more accompanied. At the next station, the car stopped and the few people who were there got out, but luckily for me, the lady next to me didn't move. I was still about 6 stops from my destination, so I would still have company. A few stops later, a man boarded the subway car. I could barely look at him because his head was down. At that moment, the lady who was next to me, without barely looking at me, told me, "Get off." The woman grabbed her purse and left seconds before the doors closed. I didn't react to what he had told me. I remained paralyzed in my seat as the subway moved forward, taking only me and the man who had just boarded. It was him, the man with the scars who'd been following me in the corridor. I didn't want to turn to look at it. I looked down and froze, praying that it would disappear in the blink of an eye. During those 3 minutes of travel, I kept my eyes closed. I knew that this man was a soul in pain and that he carried with him a great darkness. His presence was overwhelming, and I could feel it. When we finally reached the next stop, I felt the doors open. I opened my eyes and got up to go down as quickly as possible. It wasn't my stop, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. When I raised my head, the man was gone. While some passengers boarded the car, I returned to my seat and continued to my destination. Although the relief of the man disappearing was palpable, a sense of dread lingered within me. Upon arriving at the hotel, I headed directly to my room. I closed the door with a sigh of relief, finally feeling safe. However, the strange experience on the subway continued to haunt me. I sat on the bed and tried to calm down, telling myself that it was over and that I was safe. But no matter how hard I tried to push those thoughts out of my mind, the fear persisted. I turned on the light in the room and checked every corner, making sure I was alone. After a while, I decided to take a hot shower to relax and try to forget what happened. The hot water comforted me, but did not completely calm my restlessness. I changed and lay down on the bed, hoping that the tiredness would help me fall asleep. However, my thoughts continued to circle around the figure of the scarred man on the subway without finding any explanation. Finally, fatigue overcame me, and I fell into a restless sleep, plagued by nightmares about that encounter on the subway. To this day, that man remains in my dreams. All I know is that these paranormal events can find you at any time, no matter who you are and wherever you are. The appearances of these lost souls that wander among us bring darkness and fear, are very unpredictable. We are never alone. My only advice is to ignore them and never travel alone on the subway at night. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.